Hi, this is T. Nicole, and welcome to the Solace Wing. October is National Domestic Violence Month, and like we shared last month in August about Sexual Abuse Awareness Month, when I was researching the numbers for domestic violence, it was sad to see that some of the statistics were similar. But after looking at the definitions of sexual violence versus domestic violence, unfortunately, they encompass some of the same things. Um, of course, violence is violence. It's something that's willfully and forcefully done to someone against their will, whether it's sexual or um, physical. But sometimes we forget that there is an emotional violence that is done to people um, or even a spiritual violence that I don't think anyone has ever, I wouldn't say anyone has ever put that out there, but it's very few people having a discussion that there's such thing as spiritual violence. We may think of it as demonic or spiritual attacks, but I'm actually want to say spiritual violence is when someone willfully and forcefully teach you the erroneous, the incorrect word of God in order to pity one group of people against another or to psychologically abuse you for their sake of power. That's just something I'll put out there real quick, but um, didn't want to focus on that. That's just a Selah moment for you. Um, Domestic violence, right? What is it? Is it emotional or physical, willfully, intimidation, power, and control issue? Um, One in four women are or have been in a domestic violence situation. One in nine men have been in a domestic violence situation, and usually the perpetrator is, again, just like sexual abuse, is someone who is close to you or someone you know. Domestic violence, in essence, is called domestic because it's someone that you are in an intimate or relationship with. Now, you don't have to live with them. You just need to be able to prove you are in a relationship with them. And it can also include stalking, someone who stalks you, your house or at your job, and they have broadened it, even though the guidelines are still kind of general. They've broadened it to social media stalking. If you have proof of, hundreds and hundreds of threatening texts or multiple inboxes, with intimidating or violent type messaging. So most of us know what domestic violence is. However, the sexual abuse with the Me Too movement have opened a national, really a world discussion of abuses against women in general, and where there are victims who are male, men are abused. We're not going to, um, minimize that. But of course, statistics have proven that women and children are more likely than men to be sexually or physically abused. The Me Too movement, like I said, started by Tarana Burke. She was at Wake Forest recently talking about the allegations of sexual misconduct with Weinstein and Cosby and others. But she, black woman, started the Me Too movement, like I mentioned in last month's podcast, for black women and youth because they were the groups that it was not being paid attention to the most or prosecuted the most. And she wanted to get out the message of just be strong, and to debunk the sexual myths around women being violated when it comes to sexual hyperactivity and things like that, and women brings it on themselves. And unfortunately, this goes over to making it a sense of urgency and energy put towards domestic violence as well, which we need to continue to talk about because the statistics are still staggering, and it's largely believed that just like racism is systematic and systemic, so is abuses, especially when it comes against women, just because of the makeup of society and how women have always been told to be submissive in nature towards men, and children submissive in nature towards adults, and especially men. And so, of course, if your culture is telling you that women are less than or have a little voice or should take a seat, if you will, they are less likely to be believed or to be heard when they accuse a man of sexually abusing them and physically abusing them. Um, I don't think we can argue that, okay? But I just wanted to say, because of the awareness of equality with women rights, the Nobel Peace Prize was given to two people who was focusing on humanity issues, dealing with women abuses. And I just wanted to bring that out. It was a doctor in Congo. Forgive me for not knowing the name at this time, but he treats sexual victims, women victims, physical violence, of course, in Congo, and sexual violence in Congo is a form of torture for women. And a doctor in Congo just got the Peace Prize for caring for them, as long as a Rocky woman, I think her name is Nadia, I think, she came forward about the raping of the Islamic State, that women, just like men are given lashes, women are raped as a form of punishment. And she spoke out against this in her ordeal, and so she was given the Peace Prize. So the doctor in Congo and the Nadia in from Iraq, I think it is. You should look those up and learn about more of that if you hadn't. So today, domestic violence. Why am I kind of sober about this? Because unfortunately, domestic violence has hit close to home for a lot of people, and including me. And when you talk about it, when you bring it up amongst family members and friends, especially men, it's this wall that goes up, or this feeling of a barrier that comes up, as though you either can't talk about it, or it's just so prevalent that it's not a big deal, or it's always um, something like maybe women has caused it. And so, where this is not going to be long and drawn out, it is going to focus on some questions that I asked some people in a focus group, per se, and close friends. And I had got some feedback from the focus group about these questions, and the premise of this is evolving around those questions. So the first question was, which we already alluded to, was what is domestic violence? And I wanted to bring in a response that was interesting to me, because they said that domestic violence was also children beating parents or grandparents. And unfortunately, we know this happens, but I never looked at the subject thinking of that. So when we having this dialogue, do not forget about the children who are abusing the parents. Is that domestic violence? And how often is that brought to the media attention, unless it's someone famous, like the unfortunate death of Malcolm X wife that was killed by her grandson, which is still just put chills through my body when I even say that. But we forget it, and we don't talk about that. So even though we describe what domestic violence is, I wanted to bring that up because that was a point made that I had not really thought about, or I just, put it in remission or something. And then another question was, what role does women have in domestic violence? And I try to phrase that in a way of not saying that women are at fault, of course, for domestic violence, but because society paints this picture that, like I brought up in the sexual abuse live, that if you walk away and talk away and look away, then you will not get abused. And so I wondered, did this come across when you ask people, what role do you think women have in a domestic violence situation? And so you hear still the same things. She must have not been acting right, or she was cheating, or things of that nature. Like, if you do those things, then a man or your partner has a right to physically slap you or to abuse you. And I would like to say that when it comes to women talking back, that is an interesting conversation when you have them with men, that women have a lot of mouth. And personally, when you are, that I've had experience with, is when you're outspoken and articulate, that you will be labeled as a smart mouth woman, or a woman who talks too much, and you need to know your place. And trust me, there's a time to talk and there's the time to be silent. But what creeps into relationships is the idea that when a man is talking, then it's time for a woman to be quiet. Or when a man is around colleagues, he needs to be esteemed as the smarter one or the leader, and a woman needs to take her place or go into second place and be quiet. You know how your mom and dad look at you when you was a child, like when you start talking or doing something, they give you that look like you better stop. You out of your place. Unfortunately, I think there's a thin line that we did as a family, silencing our kids for speaking their thoughts, and looked at it as they're speaking a mind and they need to stay in a child's place. Sometimes I think that harmed our children's growth for quieting them when they wanted to jump into the conversation. Sometimes we didn't even let them get it out to even see what they had to say. And in some circles, we say the children should lead them, but we never did let them lead us because we would hush them. And I'm saying that to say, yes, there's a time and place for a child to speak, if it's disrespectful. We're not talking about that. But I'm using that point because sometimes men and women give each other that look like, hush now, when you're talking amongst people as though you're embarrassed of what the person is saying. And unfortunately, I was in a relationship where, I would get that look. Past relationship that I would get the look like, you need to be quiet now. You're talking too much. Or if I will interject in subjects that a woman do not supposed to interject in, especially sports, or cars, or, anything that comes to things that's supposed to be male dominated. And only men should know the statistics of this, how dare I voice my opinion about that with my dude around his friends? And how dare I look like I might know something a little bit more than he does about football or about cars or about money, So there's some subtleness to some signs of what can be domestic violence, because you remember it's not only physical, it's emotional. And emotional violence is when someone is always intimidating you and then telling you you're dumb or you're ugly or nobody wants you and you better be glad that I want you and you owe me and you won't be nothing without me and you didn't have nothing when I got you and look, just an emotional reckoning on your dignity. Or it can be emotional violence. It can be intimidation when you have your identity and your identity is always minimized. When people tell you, that you don't know what you're talking about, or when they get mad at you, oh, just because you got a degree don't mean you smart, that woman should, be seen and not heard. And go cook something. Go bake something. Go clean up. Go wash some clothes. Where your friends at? Go shopping. And they minimize your presence and your voice in their lives by demeaning you. That's emotional abuse. So yeah. So women are blamed to bring domestic violence or physical violence, mental violence on themselves because of how they act and how they talk. And then I wanted to know, men, what role do men have in minimizing domestic violence, physical violence, even sexual violence? What role do men have? And the answer to that was minimum, meaning it was few and far between that people could say what men could do other than the generic phrase of love and protect the woman. The man's supposed to lead. The man's supposed to um, love his women and household, and he has the role of protecting them. And it's funny that that is true, but it still doesn't break down in like actionable task that men supposed to do to protect women and children, to minimize themselves and other men for sexually or physically abusing women or children. Meaning, are you having these conversations in the barbershop, men? Are you having these conversations in the locker room, men? Are y'all having these conversations over beer, watching the game, men? Do y'all talk about how you can hold each other accountable for not abusing women and children? Because I really didn't get any response to that. It was like the woman's responsibility to make sure that the relationship is solid and that the man feels good about himself and she's doing the right thing, and just maybe abuses won't occur. So that was interesting. I need your feedback on that. Do you guys hold each other accountable and have these conversations? Because a lot of times I've heard that men stay out of other men's business. Unfortunately, growing up, I have seen physical violence against women and against men. I've seen men and women beat each other, to be frank about it. But what I've noticed when it happened, a lot of people would just, would stand by and say that's none of my business. Or the woman will come to the woman's rescue, and try to break it up. But the men rarely jumped in unless it was getting ugly, come on, dog. But it wasn't no immediate snatching of when it started with verbal abuse. It wasn't no check-in of, yo, you understand what I'm saying? So I know this is a tough subject, but hey, let's talk about it. Kavanaugh and Cosby. That was a difference. Played, in front of our eyes, right? It was a difference in how that played out. And what is funny, not funny, but you know what I'm saying. If you look at a post, shout outs to Cheryl Presley, who sent me some very informative articles about this subject. And one of one's from Jamila Hill, that, talk about sports and current affairs and race affairs. And she did an article, check it out on my T. Nicole Faulkner Facebook page, about unlikely supporters of Kavanaugh. Those unlikely supporters are black men who are really saying, well, yeah, he needed due process. And yeah, that was like 20, 30 years ago. They really was wrapping their mind around it, and that article did justice to why black men should be kind of slow to jump on that bandwagon that's the orange tricksters trying to put out there, and other right wing media outlets, the propaganda that they're putting out there, that if the Me Too and Time's Up and women movements move forward, then it's an attack against men. I hate to tell you, black men, I don't think they are including you in that, because still the statistics show that you're more likely to be charged with sexual abuse and domestic abuse, and more likely um, to have that on your record than someone like a Kavanaugh, who has the media and the political backing and the money backing him up. Black men go to jail. White men will get scrutinized maybe, and possibly get demoted or lack, get the don't get the promotion. That's not apple and oranges. That's like totally different. So where I understand that black men are saying due process is needed, it is needed. Someone needs to have due process in a justice system, and it needs to go that way. But you saying that because it normally don't go for you that way. So you're hoping that it happens, but it's going to happen for usually white men, especially wealthy white men and young men. They usually sometimes skip due process, and it favors them. So it's kind of funny in a weird way that men can be silent or less likely to come against the Kavanaugh because they want due process for themselves. So they skipping the whole point of the woman being believed, and not understanding that when women are hit in the face, sometimes embarrassment and shame because of people victim shaming. What did you say to get punched in the mouth? What did you do to deserve that? Usually is asked of her. Usually, unfortunately, one of the first two things that a woman will hear when she gets abused physically is, what did you do? What did you say? Cosby showed you that not only elderly can get prosecuted, black elderly and rich can get prosecuted. And that was sexual abuse. But again, remember, these things cross sectors when it comes to domestic violence, right? So when I was asking people about those things, it was told that unfortunately, black and white men are prosecuted differently. They are impacted differently when a woman accused them of abuse. And it's true, and that's obvious. But I wanted to bring up the point about black men jumping on the bandwagon with all men about their rights when it comes to domestic violence. You might want to break that down a little bit more when you come into defending your white brother. And I get your point, but you might just ponder that a little bit more. And lastly, because again I said, unfortunately, the sexual and domestic violence merge together, and some of the statistics are the same. I did want to address the dehumanization of black women as a part of the American national race story. It is very important for me to get the point out for all to hear that black women lineage, far as back as slavery, has always been one of sexual and physical abuse. We have always been labeled Jezebels. We've always been labeled asexual, meaning we want it, we deserve it from anybody, male or woman. We always have been taught to self-blame if any unwanted attention or physical activity was brought to us because of how we talked and walked and looked and where we were. We was always told to dress right, act right, and men will respect you. And if they didn't, it was something you did. And Black women have to fight against this dehumanization. We have to fight against, even when our spirituality tell us that the man is the head and the woman is the helpmate only. This does not mean that men supposed to mentally and spiritually and emotionally minimize women. This does not mean that the man can tell a woman what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and let her not voice herself or have a role in all aspects of the household or the relationship. We know this, right? The word even say men love your wives and women respect your husband. So if men are loving their wives like they are themselves, that means they're providing themselves clothing, shelter, food, transportation, then they will likewise provide that to the women in their lives, the children in their lives. And then if they're doing that in return, a woman is going to respect them. She see he's doing it every day. So, why think he can't do it now? Right? It goes hand in hand. It's partnership. It's 100 and 100. It's not even 50 and 50. It's a man being a man, a woman being a woman, and they're 100 and 100. They're fortified. We know this. So why is it hard for us to come against our right as women, even in the church? Please read that quote from a Yale professor, a doctor, a Black pastor who is speaking against this. Don't let the form of righteousness deny you